we don't do Pakistan because that's Delhi's happy obsession.
It is.
And may they be there.
Yeah.
They did not even have an obsession with China, which is quite interesting because China is in the north.
Yeah.
They do not. We have the obsession on China.
Mm.
And because they don't understand, Delhi doesn't understand this kind of money and what China does with the money.
Mm.
From the Indian viewpoint is interesting. You know, Mr. Jaishankar has had this outspoken diplomacy
Yes.
at the Bratislava Security Council conference,
Uh-huh.
where he said, he made that famous statement that Europe thinks that Europe's problems are the world's problems. The world's problems are not Europe's problems.
Yes.
And that kind of was the match that has lit the confidence of the Global South.
Mhm.
And everybody related to this. It's like, yeah, of course. And that particular clip, I think, is on the phone of every diplomat in the Global South. Like,
Oh, really?
here is the thing, the other ones, especially France, UK, United States, and maybe Russia, they do not want to see the rise of Germany again. They remember.
Oh, they do
World Wars,
remember.
right?
They remember those marching boots.
Yes.
It's interesting you said that China is copying the West. I think that
China is a replica of the West.
they idolize the US.
I do.
Don't they?
That's right.
Yeah,
They want to be the United States.
that's right.
They love the US. They want to be the US.
Manjeet Kripalani ji, welcome to the podcast. So lovely to have you finally on the podcast.
Thank you, Abhijit. I'm delighted to be here.
The delight is mine. So, before we get into the matter, first of all, why don't we talk about Gateway House and the work you do with Gateway House? What is Gateway House? What's the story like, and what work do you do with it?
So Gateway House is a foreign policy think tank. Officially, it's a foreign policy think tank based in Mumbai. We are here to give India a global voice. We're mostly research-based. We do have, it's a membership-based model. We didn't want to take money from government or foreign agencies, so we are independent. We take money, we have members who contribute also to our foreign policy thinking, and these are individuals, they're associations, they're companies, diplomats, the armed forces, academics. The Indian Navy is one of our members, for instance.
I see.
We have a naval officer seconded to us for 2 years, so he can engage with the civilian idea of foreign policy, since maritime security, particularly in Mumbai, has become so important.
Yes.
And with companies, we use, because we are based in Mumbai, the financial capital of India, no foreign policy is complete without getting the view of the company. And in fact, Gateway House was started in 2000. Well, the idea was born in 2006 when I was at the Council on Foreign Relations as a fellow in New York, and Neelam was our Consul General in New York, and we were just 3 streets apart. But we realized that CFR is really that New York-based organization that, like the US companies lead their foreign policy.
Yes.
In India, our companies were leading foreign policy in 2006. There was India Everywhere at Davos. IT companies were, all over the world plugged into global corporations. But neither were the companies leveraging the government, nor was the government leveraging companies.
I see.
And I would say some of that is still true.
Okay.
Except for the exception of maybe Mr. Adani, who has been following the flag.
Okay.
And that is a recent development of a businessman who thinks it's beneficial to do it. But typically, Indian businesses are quite independent and of India's interests.
Of India's interests.
Yes.
Okay.
They will do things that are commercially viable. So in that sense, they're real purists. On the other hand, you really cannot compete globally unless you have a strategic interest
Indeed.
in your own country's affairs.
Yes.
And so that is why Gateway House was founded. Neelam and I got together and we wrote the concept note at that time. And I asked Richard Haas, who was the president of CFR, if he minded that we create something similar in Mumbai. And he said, if there has to be a true Council on Foreign Relations, the only place it can be in is Mumbai, where it can truly mimic what they do.
In New York.
And so it was born. So, we went around. Neelam was just finishing her term, and I went around in Bombay talking this up. I could not get any attention.
I see.
A lot of my conversations were just sort of intellectual entertainment, and people would say how nice, how very quaint. But ये अमेरिका में होता है, यहाँ तो नहीं होता है.
Okay.
हमारी exports ठीक है, and हमारे पास 65% exports हैं और we don't need anything else. हम तो खुश हैं.
Okay.
So I said, that's fine, but your 65% exports at some point, if there is a crisis, there is risk, then what happens? And we've already seen that in the past, right? And they said, nothing will ever happen. Or people would say, well, I know Manmohan Singh. What can you do for me? So, so everything went on. We were a little disappointed. And then the attacks took place in Bombay.
That's right.
And everyone said, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Who are these people? Why have they attacked? What is this group? What have they done? How have we responded? Because Bombay was just frozen for 3 full days.
It was, yes.
And the businessmen in particular really were shocked because we all thought we were just, untouchable because we were doing so well worldwide. And it did not happen. And we realized how vulnerable we were. And that's when we managed to get the funding.
I see.
We got 4 key funders, Mohandas Pai, the Mahindra Group, TVS Motors, Suzlon, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, and especially the Bombay lovers, Mahindra Group, Rakesh, and these people who love the city and understand what it means. And then later on we got funding from a lot of the other corporations. And that's how we started Gateway House. So now we are now in our 14th year.
14th year.
And we still feel like a startup, but we know we have a place in the firmament of think tanks worldwide, which is how we got to this this project, the survey, with the Koba Foundation Stiftung in Germany.
Okay.
Where they approached us and said, we'd like to do the survey. We want to be able to think about your place in the world, the new changing place in the world. We've read your research, and would you like to discuss it? So I happened to be in Berlin. We had a conversation with Julia, who was leading the project at the Stiftung, and it's been a year.
It's been a year.
It's been a year.
Okay.
Almost a year, and the report is now out. So it was an idea that not everyone in Germany, particularly this organization, this foundation, had thought about Germany's place. What does it mean? The world is changing, and also because Germany has always been such a leader in Europe.
It has.
And unfortunately, the wars that are taking place, and now Europe seems to be subservient to the United States.
Well, that is true.
Yes?
It is.
And so I think that the Europeans don't much like it, and they want to be able to regain their rightful place in the world. And so they're trying to think about this. I don't know whether you remember, Abhijit, but in 2001, when the US was attacked, when New York was attacked, there was an outpouring of sort of, wonderment. Why does everybody hate us so much? And there were all these cover-up stories the US press was doing. Why do they hate us so much? They didn't, they never looked. They only thought about themselves, and they never looked at anybody else.
That's right.
And I think that Europe is having a similar moment. They're not as outspoken about it as the US is.
As the US.
And, but they are having a feeling of, Europe is Europe. It's more traditional. It understands other societies better. It has been the colonizer, so it has acceptance in many places. They have friends in many places, and so I think it's been a real wake up call. And then you've got 4 hot, three hot wars and one sort of 3.5 hot wars. You've got Russia, Ukraine. You've got Israel, Gaza, right? You've got the pressure going on in Afghanistan. The disgraceful departure of NATO.
Yes.
Which is still, it's a hot war. They don't see it because it's so far from them, but we know what it's about. And then you've got the provocations to China, which are resulting in this really hot belt between Taiwan and China. These are unnecessary things. And for Asia, it is a real fear having a Western-induced conflict in the region, especially because Asia has taken so much time to get ASEAN together, get the trade agreements together, and whatever it is. China, they had the Asian tigers. China copied the Asian tigers. Now China became a sher.
And dragon.
Dragon. That's right. That's right. And it dominates this area But still, there is no conflict. The Asians are very, very sensible. They avoid conflict. They know what to do with a big, powerful player. And the business elite in all the Asian countries are Chinese.
Yes.
And so there is a different play there. India is starting to now come into, because of these conflicts, we are the beneficiaries. So we're starting to get the China plus one, the supply chains.
Yes.
But in any case, I think that was our inevitable future, only because we're so strong in our software and we're so good at our manufacturing. We haven't got a lot of it in terms of manufacturing, but whatever it is very good. And unbeknownst to many and untalked about, there are, I know, so many Western companies that have invested in factories here. They don't want to share with anybody else that they're really doing well in India. They're not telling anyone. They're allowing everybody to settle in China. And meanwhile, they're all over India. They're doing very well. They're making big investments, as you know. The pension funds are making investments. AIIB is making its biggest investment in India. So we are there now. And now if we get into supply chains, then we are really in the global value chain and supply chain. And that puts us in a beneficial position. So we don't know our, this is a lot of what Gateway House tracks.
Okay.
We look at it partly because we're tracking trade. We have an economist, we track trade. We look at China. We look a lot at China because business is impacted so much by them.
Yes.
And India is impacted. We look at connectivity. We always wondered what was all these Belt and Road going on. Since 2014, we've been looking at it, just in 2012. Looking at connectivity, what is our internal connectivity, our external connectivity, what do corridors mean with Asia. And so much of it is what India has done and mostly what it's not done. It's not been able to build the infrastructure that it promised in Myanmar or in Bangladesh.
Yes.
And so our job as a think tank is to keep track of all this. We don't do Pakistan because that's Delhi's happy obsession.
It is.
And may they be there.
Yeah.
They did not even have an obsession with China, which is quite interesting because China is in the north.
Yeah.
They do not. We have the obsession on China. And because they don't understand, Delhi doesn't understand this kind of money and what China does with the money. So we do a lot of that work, and the maritime security, of course, we're looking at what's across in our oceans, the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean.
Yes.
And so that's Gateway House.
That's Gateway House. That's quite a bit of work you're doing.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of research.
All right. So let's talk about the report. This report, Emerging Middle Powers Report 2024. What is this report? Who has done the research? And what were the motivations? And we'll come into the findings as well.
So I'm going to show you how nice this report is.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So really the objective of the report is to understand these widely differing actions in the world and these four significant, 3.5 hot wars.
Yeah.
What has happened is that the Koba Stiftung, which is a very unusual foundation in Germany, it decided to conduct a survey to understand it. It picked 3 countries, which is IPSA, really, India, Brazil, South Africa, which is a grouping, the pre-BRICS grouping that China and Russia decided to bookend to become BRICS. But IPSA is India, Brazil, South Africa, and they felt these were more representative countries of the emerging developed world. And it's correct because we're all G20 presidents.
Yes.
India, Brazil, and South Africa in 2025, right?
Yeah.
So, and for Germany, these are countries which it has strong relationships with. So it became GIPSA, Germany,
Okay.
Germany, India, Brazil, South Africa. So 3 think tanks were approached. There was Gateway House from Mumbai, the BRICS Policy Center in Rio de Janeiro, and the South African Institute for International Affairs in Johannesburg.
Okay.
SIA is a real representative of Africa. It's one of the oldest. It's an excellent think tank. It is going to be, I think, the Sherpa for South Africa.
Okay.
The BRICS Policy Center is attached to a university. And these are some of the great ways to... Brazil is very smart about how they engage their policy. They work with their companies, their universities and the think tanks. And the government. They're really good. This was, for us, it was a chance to really work together with countries that we know and like and that we've already engaged with during the G20. We do a lot of G20 research. We have been since 2014.
I see.
So these are all very familiar places and countries and ideas. And we all told the Germans that we will engage with it, but we would like to set the questions. Because if the West sets the question, you'll already have a bias.
That's right.
And so we want to set the questions. And they agreed readily.
Okay.
It's an unusual foundation.
Times are changing.
Yes, times are changing. So we set the questions, and we found obviously that we had so much in common.
Okay.
And it was a real pleasure. So in fact, we set the first lot of the questions, and they were refined. And then we all went to Berlin, spent about 2-3 days, sorted it all out, and found that really the compatibility is quite remarkable.
Okay.
So, and the purpose was to eliminate any bias in the product. And a word on the foundation, which is really so unusual and open-minded. So the Koba Stiftung's goal is to provide what they call a practical impetus for international understanding.
Okay.
And so they create surveys and workshops in order to help, rather than have long papers, to help people understand how to cross the chasm.
Okay.
So the foundation is built on the business of a man called Kurt Koba, who was an electrical engineer from Hamburg.
Okay.
He had 200 patents to his name.
Okay.
And one of his businesses was making machines for cigarettes and held tobacco cutters. And I think that now, of course, it's a multi-technology company. But given that background, he did something quite remarkable. It's a very, very wealthy company, but it has only one shareholder, and that's the foundation. And the reason I say this is because it's a great model for those who think about stakeholders. In India, the only similar model is Tata, with Tata Sons, right? Where 60% is the public. It's Tata Sons that gives money out to stakeholders. But the Koba Foundation is one very unusual one.
Okay.
And so we have to point that out.
Okay, so that's the
foundation and our motivation for doing it.
Yeah.
I think the survey has, as you had asked, the survey has different foreign policy priorities with India, Brazil, South Africa.
Yeah.
And you had asked about the methodology.
Yes.
So the methodology is exactly as we did. But what happens in the end, we take all the findings.
Yeah.
We look at the trend lines. We look at the trend lines diagonal, across the board, straight, vertical, which is the gender trend lines.
Okay.
Which are the because we used experts. We gave out this. We all gave out the survey to people we knew in our world. So academics, government officials, policymakers, think tankers, and business people.
Okay.
And some NGOs that are in the space. Yeah.
Yes.
In the space. It was pushed out to a large number of people, but we wanted to select groups. So 1,000 responses.
Slightly less than 1,000. Yeah.
Just
a wee
bit.
Yeah, but let's say 1,000.
1,000.
Yeah.
But typically about 1,000 responses came back, and then we looked at the trend lines. What was going where, who was looking what. For us, the results were not surprising.
Okay.
But for the Germans,
they were surprising. Of course. Yes.
So that's how we did it. And they had a survey company that conducted the survey. We all put it out to our group. So they were very particular that it shouldn't go out on, just general public. It has to be people who are thoughtful.
Yes, right.
About and understand the subject. So that's it.
So how many questions were there in total?
There were a total of between 20 and 22 questions.
Okay.
I think, maybe 20 to 25, depends. Some were long form questions, some were shorter form questions. Some were multiple choice questions.
Okay.
One or two questions at the end, which I don't know whether they include them as a questions or not, had a long answer that you could give if you wanted to. But by and large, we looked at the multiple choice because we talked to each other and said, what is reflective in your country? And we gave people choices of saying other, and they had to say what that was.
So you said that the Germans were surprised by the results.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, that was exactly the exercise that they wanted to do. They wanted to understand what was... So just some findings. For instance, they said they were surprised to find that the two countries that had a problem with China was Germany and India.
Okay.
Germany for different reasons, India for different reasons,
Different
right?
reasons, very different reasons.
But the Brazilians and the Africans did not.
Yeah.
Now, for you and me, it's pretty obvious.
It's common sense. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But not so much for them. The G7 lives in a closed world.
A bubble.
Yes.
Yes.
And part of it is the G7 is part of the G20, G21. That G14 and the G7 are on two separate planets. I mean, it's a little bit like somebody used to tell me inside every fat book, there's a thin book struggling to get out. So, similarly, in this G20, I feel that the G7 is kind of the fat in the G20. They really have to, align with the rest. So we're kind of pulling them in, and they are resisting it.
Yes.
Luckily, Germany is not, and we must also not forget that Germany is part of the G4, which is India, Brazil, Japan, and Germany that wants to be part of the UN Security Council.
That's right.
And so they have more of an interest in understanding what these countries that they are going to be keeping company with also want to do. And so that was some of the surprises in Germany. They had a little bit about why there was some questioning about they were not able to understand the difference between having a non-West view and having an anti-West view.
Very different things.
Yes.
Yeah, but they didn't get it.
They have a hard time processing it. And it's a little like the Americans say, but why do they hate us? It is not, no one is ganging up against anybody else. In fact, we found that much of the world, and especially our countries, developing world, which reflects a lot of the world, we don't really want a regime change of the international order. We do not want it.
We don't want that.
We don't want it.
We want a more equitable order.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
We want a more equitable order, and we want it reformed.
Yes.
So Germany, in fact, said that in a question that was asked about the UN Security Council, the Germans were quite clear. They want it replaced if necessary.
Replaced?
Yes.
Well, that's quite extreme,
yes,
isn't it?
It is quite extreme.
Yes.
Whereas we want a reform.
A reform.
And so there were little surprises on both sides. And also we must not forget the Germans are not being allowed. What is the UK doing in UN Security Council? It may be a founder member of the United Nations, but it has no weight in the world, no relevance.
No
in the
relevance.
world.
Yeah.
France has its own energy. It's a little independent. It has manufacturing. It's okay. Still, it's not that they have such a heavy weight that they should be sitting with the United States, China, and Russia. So I did a little looking in. I mean, except for South Africa, all the G4 are in the top 10 economies,
Yes.
and we already are. We're going to be overtaking Germany soon. Germany
Soon
number
enough.
3. It'll happen. But the Germans understand it. But here is the thing: the other ones, especially France, UK, United States, and maybe Russia. They do not want to see the rise of Germany again. They remember.
Oh, they do
World Wars,
remember.
right?
They remember those marching boots.
Yes. So they fear the rise of Germany.
Yes.
And so in some sense, we're all in the same space. Because they fear the rise of Germany. They also fear the rise of the non-West.
The non-West.
Yes. And so it's a good combination that we had. It was good that this particular group of 4 countries conducted the survey.
Now, what are some of the salient points of the survey? What are the interesting findings?
So interesting findings are, I would say, 2-3 things. So the biggest foreign policy challenge, so I'll just run over 2 or 3 of these.
Yeah.
So it's really, mostly it has to do with geography and resources. Foreign policy challenges for India, China.
Naturally.
Right?
Yes.
Foreign policy challenge for Brazil is climate change.
Surprisingly. Now,
Yes.
I was surprised
You
to
were
see
surprised,
that.
right?
Yes.
Because of the Amazon.
The Amazon, of course. It made sense, of course.
And also because Bolsonaro had been talking about privatizing some of the areas of the Amazon. So with the Lula government in particular, it is climate change across the board for Brazil is very important. For South Africa, it's the economy, energy.
Makes sense.
And across the board for all of us, and for Germany, it was China was a problem, and of course Russia, Ukraine. That was
Ukraine.
expected.
Yeah.
Across the board for all of us, it's trade.
Trade. Yes.
It's energy security, and it is the economy.
The economy.
Yeah, and that I think has been across the board the same. Then on who conducts who is the most important, who drives foreign policy in your country?
Okay.
Very different views. So in India, it's the foreign ministry.
Yeah.
In Germany, it's the government, right? In South Africa, it is the ruling party, ANC.
Okay, the ANC.
It's the founding party of the new South Africa.
The new South Africa.
So the ANC does it. Our foreign ministry, we are truly a bureaucratic country. But the foreign ministry drives our foreign policy. And Brazil, it is the head of state.
The head of state himself or herself.
So so there's government, there's foreign particular ministry, there's the head of state. Lula and Bolsonaro both did, and the ANC in South Africa. Which
That's quite interesting.
It is quite interesting.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting, and they're different. These are different entities that bring a different view of foreign policy. So I'll tell you how that plays out. So, for instance, when the two things, the South Africans, when they took Israel to the International Court of Justice,
they did, yeah.
Right? That was something that follows, because when South Africa became independent, apartheid was dropped and had their own state. At that point, a statement was made saying that we believe that Gaza should also not be occupied, that there's an apartheid going on in Gaza, a different kind of, and we stand by Gaza. As we establish our own nation, we stand by Gaza. So they have a long history of standing by Palestine, not Gaza, but standing by Palestine.
Okay.
Not Hamas, but Palestine.
Palestine.
The second thing is that we have, so that's quite interesting. South Africa also then took, it led a peace delegation to Russia, Ukraine. Now there are different reasons for it. One is obviously that Russia, Ukraine provide them food, fuel, fertilizer. Right?
Yes.
That's for Brazil also is fertilizer. For us, it's fuel and fertilizer. So but the South Africans led a delegation, a peace delegation, to Russia and Ukraine to say, what could we do? Unfortunately, it was mocked by the West. They did not understand. People who have no idea about Africa said, what are they going to do? What is this group of conflict-ridden states going to do? Well, it is precisely that. There are conflicts in South Africa. They have a legacy of mediation. They are constantly mediating each other's conflicts. They really have a knowledge base, and they have the ability to do it. We only hear about the conflicts. We don't hear about what has been mediated and now is okay, right? So there are many such states. Rwanda is now okay, and it isn't a hero of the West that has brought peace. So they are really good at this. So that is why South Africa has a different view, and the ANC has a different view about how to do what drives foreign policy. In India, from the Indian viewpoint, is interesting. You know, Mr. Jaishankar has had this outspoken diplomacy.
Yes,
it began the first time. He's been very active, but the outspokenness began in June 2022 at the Bratislava Security Council conference, and. Where he said, he made that famous statement that Europe thinks that Europe's problems are the world's problems. The world's problems are not Europe's problems.
Yes.
And that kind of was the match that has lit the confidence of the Global South. And everybody related to this. It's like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they think. And that particular clip, I think, is on the phone of every diplomat in the Global South. Like,
oh, really?
The Pakistanis started quoting it. The Africans quote it everywhere. It's just become something that people now can say with confidence. But it took a country like India to say it.
That's right.
What has happened with that, Mr. Jaishankar has now said that he's changed the narrative. And we know from the recent interview of the president of Guyana,
yes,
which you watched.
That's right.
Which was just marvelous. So 2 years has led to this, to a confident Global South.
Yes.
Confident in itself, confident of its history, confident of its current relevance, and confident in its economy and its decision making.
Right.
So these are the things that really matter, and therefore these surveys that bring out all of this tells an important story about the evolution of international affairs, of course, and of the world and of countries. And so, you know, when I was in Germany, now everywhere, wherever you travel, I'm sure you know, India is an assumed participant on the table.
It is, yes.
And it used to be China.
It used to be China. Yeah.
And now it is us. And also it's much easier to relate to us. We don't have a language problem.
Yeah.
We don't have to be studied. They know us. More importantly, we know them.
We know them.
And although English can be, it's kind of a false sort of comfort in the sense that so much of India is so very steeped in its own language and tradition.
Yes.
That they have to understand that also. Not everybody speaks English, right? So it's been quite interesting. And the preference for mediation, all in terms of the wars, none of these countries want wars. Germany has been compelled, it's in that situation, and I don't know what they're going to do. They are not going to physically get into another war. And they were very cross when Macron said that he was going to put boots on the ground in
Quite
Ukraine.
recently.
It's like,
Yes.
I mean, NATO does not want to do it. They want to just manage the wars, give them money, and let them fight, and let regime change happen the way they want it without their being physically there. So the mediation was very, very important for all three countries because we do not want any wars. We are focused on our own development.
Yes.
India, Brazil, South Africa. Germany understands it is now in the hole because of the US sanctions, which have really prevented everybody from just normalized businesses.
Yes.
It has prevented us from doing what we need to do. But luckily, there are so many of us now on the other side that we can learn to work with each other. And
That's
so the fear that these countries, the West has, and it was repeatedly come out in the survey also, anti-West versus non-West, BRICS plus, really, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Is that something? It's really, I would say on the part of the West, the BRICS plus it's just paranoia.
Just paranoia.
It's paranoia. No one is they specifically think that the BRICS plus is all these developing countries ganging up against them.
Well, the Chinese could accuse the West of doing the same with the Quad, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And but we're not ganging up against anybody.
We're not, yeah.
We're just not. No one is gang. We just want it to be equitable. We want it to be fair. We want it to be equitable. And therefore, some of the questions said, well, what is it that will make it more equitable?
Yes.
And some of those answers are, can we please have technology transfer instead of holding everything to yourself?
Yes.
Can we please also hold, because the West is very, the trade is very stuck on legal issues and IPR and all these things.
IPR, yes.
You just cannot have it. So they want more equitable trade. We need technology transfers. We want more equitable terms of trade.
That's right.
So India, for instance, we have human capital like much of the global south.
Yes.
When we have something to offer, we have human services to offer. The West has goods. They did really okay with China because China produced the goods
Yes.
for the West. They produced Western goods for the West.
For the West.
And they have consequently stunted their services growth. Our services growth has blossomed. So we want equitable terms and services. This never the twain shall meet. You better do what we do with goods and you better give us what we want. Our services are superior to yours. That is going to now come to an end. And because countries like Australia were listening to India, right? When they created a trade agreement, they did a two-part, and they did say, what do you want?
Yes.
Rather than, this is what we want from you. There's a long line, Abhijit, since we started Gateway House, and I would say 2009, 2010, we have been hearing the same story. A long line of people wanting to do free trade agreements with India, all frustrated because they want from India what India doesn't have to give. I mean, we don't have goods to give. And so it's always been unfair. And Brazil feels the same way, but Brazil has things to give, but it has a few things to give. So Brazil and South Africa, Brazil, for instance, some of the findings were, why is Brazil not countering China? Why do they not have a hostile relationship with China?
Yeah.
Well, Brazil is resource-based. I mean,
Yes.
it has population, but not that much. They have all the resources in the world. 30% of their exports are to China.
To China.
And out of those 30%, there are four exports. 90% of Brazil's iron ore, 90% of Brazil's soybean, 90% of Brazil's the soybean, the Brazil, and I'll just tell you what 90% of all this goes to oil,
okay.
and minerals. All goes to China.
Well, they would love China for that. Yeah.
I mean, they called Brazil the gateway to China's gateway to South America. You know, this is their market, and that's what Brazil has to sell. South Africa and all of Africa is so dependent on the Chinese because they have had such exploitative regimes, and the Belt and Road and all that. The Africans are all pledged to the Chinese, unfortunately. And so you cannot expect them to have positions that are detrimental to their national interests.
To their own interests. Yes.
And so those were some of the findings. And oil, iron ore, soybeans, and meat also.
Meat, okay.
Meat. Brazil exports a lot of meat to China.
Okay.
And so these are the total dependents.
This survey is titled "Listening Beyond the Echo Chamber."
It is.
So what does that mean?
So this is again Germany trying to step out and understand what's going on in the world. Our questions were kind of, when we set the questions, they were unusual by Western terms, right? According to Western terms. So, although there's a way a survey is conducted, we learned a lot from this. But the G7 is just talking to itself.
To itself.
Yeah. And the G7 is a homogeneous group, right? They're very used to dominating the world.
Yes.
It's a homogeneous group. They have a lot of trade with each other, and really they have formidable coherence with each other. Formidable.
Yes.
When they hand over G7 presidency to the next, they know there's a continuum in this.
Yes.
They just don't understand why the others can't be that way. Well, you know, this is a world, it's diverse, we're full of God's creatures, we're all kinds. They have not understood it. And they've also not understood that not everybody wants to be like them now.
Yes,
and
indeed.
so in the echo chamber with the media, with government policy makers, with academics, it is absolutely, you ask a question, you're guaranteed to get a similar answer from another European country or the United States. The dissenting voices inside are not being heard or being called to the table to have a conversation. The Germans are talking about the AfD, which is the more right-wing party, is getting a lot of support in Germany just now. There's talk in Germany of banning the AfD. Banning a party. So I asked them, I said, but that is anti-democratic.
Clearly.
And they said, well, our constitution says when there's a threat to democracy, then you have to stop that threat.
By being undemocratic.
They can't, they just don't see it differently. And so it was shocking for us, who they are now describing as a hybrid democracy, half autocratic. It is shocking for us. I mean, we have the most ridiculous parties, and everybody is in the mela.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody is in the fray.
Yes.
You've got to have it, no matter how ridiculous you are. We had I used to work with Meera Sanyal when she stood for election, and we'd spend a lot of time in the election commission office, you know, registering, getting your symbol, etc. Abhijit, it's a joy to sit in that office because all kinds of characters are floating around with their own little political party.
I see.
There was one sadhu who actually had a PhD.
Okay.
He decided to be a sadhu, but he had his own little party and his own little group of followers.
Okay.
They came to get their symbol, and it did not. Neither did the election commission bat an eyelid. Neither did this sadhu and his gang bat an eyelid. His views were out there.
Okay.
But he was there and he wanted to be the Prime Minister of India.
I see.
And his party was going to win. And it is joyous to be in a place where these things are celebrated.
This is democracy, isn't it?
Democracy.
Yes.
And if a winning party is a winning party and has no opposition, that is not the fault of the winning party.
Yeah, it's not.
And so the Germans have a coalition for the first time, really a large coalition. And they're finding it hard to manage.
Okay.
But it's really good for them because they will learn how to cope with others, the non-them.
The non-them.
And the AfD is also German. They are flesh and blood of Germans. Banning them, I found it really alarming as a Democrat. So they have different, they have different views on how to, what it means to be democratic, how to participate in the world, etc.
I see.
It was quite interesting.
What were the views on the G20?
Yes. So the G20, just now, as you know, the G20 is today the only functional multilateral.
Yes.
Okay. And the reason it's that functional multilateral is because it has no bureaucracy. The G20 is like the Rotary Club. It has a past, the presidency is a rolling presidency, annually 1 year. They have what is called the Troika, which is the past president, current president, and future president.
Yeah.
And it's a relay race, right? You hand over, you brief them, you tell them what is going on. You have a continuum of the ideas in the G20, but every presidency is allowed to add their own.
Yeah.
And typically they add their own things that are very central to those countries and to their region, typically. And so the G20 is that multilateral grouping now which is functional because every country then has to learn the art of international affairs and multilateralism anew. And it takes 20 years before you're back again, by which time the world has already changed, right?
Yes.
So its outcomes are non-binding, but because it doesn't have a permanent bureaucracy, it's very flexible, the G20. Unfortunately now, because the UN has become dysfunctional or ineffective completely, the Bretton Woods institutions are refusing to adapt and refusing to reform. We now have the G20 that was purely economic. It was called the Economic Steering Committee of the World. It was set up to prevent another crisis, prevent another financial crisis.
Yeah.
It has now become saddled with, SDGs and development goals, etc. And I was a bit shocked because seeing the growth of G20, all of a sudden the stuff is creeping in. And it's because the UN is completely ineffective. So people are saying the G20 is an equitable place. The G7 and the developing countries are an equal platform.
Yes.
And so it has become that institution that is able to, where people can listen to each other, where they can talk to each other. And even if multilaterally they don't get a lot done, bilaterally there's a lot going on. Regionally there's a lot going on. So the G20 is it doesn't put a lot of pressure on people. The pressure is on the country to get a consensus statement, etc.
Yes.
But by and large, I think it's a much better institution now than it has been. And it really is a lesson for the others that be more like the G20, which is be adaptable, be equal, be equitable, and have just trust, have faith. And so the G20 is part of that. And every country does it differently. It's so, for instance, we did digital public goods. Right?
Yes.
That was our offering to the world. And it is something we're very good, the India Stack, etc.
Yes.
Turkey, when it was the G20 president in 2014, Turkey is very good. It has the small, medium-sized businesses. So what they did was they put their small and business chamber and the businesses right in front. And that alone gave Turkish businesses so much exposure that they started getting more, contracts from around the world, etc.
I see.
Turkish road building and habitat building, they then started to expand to Africa. They've had good aid agencies. The G20 does a lot for countries. And I'm excited to see what India will do and be in the next 5 years as a consequence of being the G20 president. So that's why all three countries and Germany see G20 as a much better multilateral which can address the issues of global crises.
Global crisis. So that's G20.
Yeah.
What were the differences in attitude when it comes to a conflict like Ukraine? So India, Brazil, and South Africa would have perhaps a more mediative kind of attitude?
Yes, mediative for sure. But so Germany on one side, they stand by Ukraine.
So they essentially toe the US line, right?
Yes,
the Germans.
absolutely. They toe the US line, and they also have a fear of Russia.
They do,
because Russia defeated them. They don't want Russia to rise, and others don't want Germany to rise. It's really complex. So India and Brazil both depend on Russia for food, fuel, fertilizer. So does South Africa. And so, but South Africa has a different, and therefore the mediation and taking the peace, the group of, the peacemaking grouping to the leaders, to Russia and South Africa, was very, very important to Africa, because they were speaking South Africa, they were speaking for all of Africa. And some of the African countries. So they really want this to end. They are not interested in it. We don't know how this is going to look. Either you get a new US president that will pull the plug. We've just now got, NATO has a new head who is Miss Kallas, who's from Estonia. I mean, these people.
Miss Kallas is the head of NATO.
Yes, she's the new head of NATO.
Oh wow, that's nice.
This is not going to let up on this war at all. It is going to, under her leadership, it is going to continue. It is going to be ramped up, but
she's pretty hawkish, isn't she?
Very.
Yes.
And this is not, Estonia is such a small country.
Yeah.
Is making these big decisions. Sometimes you have to know, if you have to be able to make decisions for your entire grouping. Really, can you represent them? And maybe that's democracy in Europe and NATO and the EU.
Their version of democracy.
I don't know what it is, but we can expect not to see many of these issues being resolved. And so Germany was very clearly on the support Ukraine side, but German business is really suffering.
Germany has gone into a recession as a consequence of what's happening here.
And they feel it. There's also, because Angela Merkel led in all the migrants from the wars in 2016, that has become a flood of just migrants, like people migrate to places for economic, to better their lives economically.
Economic refugees.
There's no such thing as the economic refugee, unless your country has collapsed. But they're not refugees. They are just migrants looking for a better life.
A better life,
So asylum seekers, refugees, I mean, all these have become very mixed up. And because Europe and the EU and the US, they have very clear stand on values, human rights and values. These human rights and values didn't exist in 1947 during the partition. It didn't exist during the colonial days. And now all of a sudden we are being expected to
live up to those values.
Which are not our values. And, being shamed. As you know, they all cultivate people from our part of the world who can speak for them.
Oh, indeed.
Yes.
Indeed. Stock puppets.
Yes. Yeah. And that, so that bubble, that echo chamber is this. This is the echo chamber that they have to live in. And it can be quite oppressive, because you think to yourself, is there no other voice? Well, now, there are other voices. And Koba really did a good job of exposing us to various elements in Germany, apart from the Chancellor and the Chancellery, to the Bundestag, to the Chambers of Commerce, to the China groupings, to academia. It is very, very important to hear the other voices, because otherwise the world will just be separated.
Indeed. So what exactly does Germany seek to do when it comes to Ukraine? So we're very clear that India, South Africa, Brazil want mediation.
They want
the conflict to be
war to end.
Yeah, but Germany, what does it want? It wants a NATO victory over Russia? What does it want?
Germany wants NATO victory over Russia.
That's never going to happen.
It's not, But they are convinced. They feel, I presume in their hearts, they know that it's a proxy war. They want Ukraine to win. Unfortunately, Ukraine has lost everything.
It has already lost the war. I mean, it's just
lost its land. It's lost its people, its youth. It's
a disaster for a nation. It's going to end up partitioned along the Dnieper River, I guess.
You're right. Because there are already countries that want parts of it. They remember from the previous war.
They have memories.
Right. And so all this lecturing about why do you want your land back and why can you do Kashmir 370? Well, dear Europe, you're doing the exact same thing.
They're waiting like vultures near a dying animal.
Yes.
When do I get my peace?
Yes. And so, unfortunately, in Ukraine has really this perfectly wonderful middle class, highly technical, technocratic country has been destroyed.
Destroyed. Yeah.
And so Germany really has no option, but now that they've started it, how can they save face and withdraw? And everybody has now made it such a article of faith to hate President Putin that they can't go back on it, because now they've said it so many times. You can, whatever it is, there were elections in Russia, oh, they're fake.
Yeah.
The elections so-and-so, oh, they're rigged. Others cannot be blamed all the time. You have to look at yourself.
Please introspect.
And maybe the Russian people have said, and we know this to be true across the board everywhere.
Yeah.
During wartime, leaders are re-elected.
Look at Bush Jr. Look at his popularity ratings during the
That's right.
the attacks.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you've got Netanyahu just now. Their protesters want an election, but you're in the middle of a war.
You can't have an election in the middle of war.
It is really this is what happens. And countries do rally around their leaders, no matter how rotten they are.
Yeah.
They wait till later
to
say whether we want to get rid of them or not.
That's right.
And so that is what Germany wants really from Russia. We do not want it because we really want the equity. We want Ukraine to be back. So many of our students were studying there.
Okay.
22,000 Indian students who were evacuated.
Yes.
Just India's good diplomacy to get them out in the first week.
Mr. Putin stopped the war for 6 hours to get these guys out.
That's right. And so did Mr. Zelensky.
Mr. Zelensky as well.
Also.
That's right.
So it was really, because we've got the old Soviet ties and they are intact, we are able to manage in these regions.
Yes.
And we are also not seen as a bad actor.
We're not.
And just now, even now, though we are on the rise, we're invited to every table, we're still not taking sides. And that's the correct thing to do for us, because we have to look after ourselves first.
Let's talk China. There are very different perceptions. Like you said, South Africa and Brazil have a pretty favorable view of China. India and Germany, on the other hand, I suppose would be kind of wary of China, but for different reasons. So what are these reasons?
So the reason for us is they're on our borders.
Yes.
They are there. 21 border round military rounds of talks.
I thought it was 378, but I stopped counting. So
21, I think 16 diplomatic talks, non-military talks on the border, and they're still not getting off. I was in Nathula just this past week. The Chinese are there acting up. They are a territorial power.
Yeah.
And none of these countries, actually neither Brazil nor Germany nor South Africa has China as their neighbor.
That's right.
And so people don't understand what we know.
Yeah.
Right? The US understands it from Taiwan, but Taiwan doesn't share land border even.
That's right.
With China. And so Pakistan, Myanmar, we all understand what it means, and Afghanistan, we know what it means.
To live in this sort of neighborhood.
Yes, and to live in the neighborhood where we have been totally surrounded.
Yes.
The Germans, because they worry about their business. They know that their businesses have been completely hollowed out. They did not have to. I was actually shocked when I was a reporter and reporting on how, America outsourced its manufacturing to China, mostly because they wanted clean blue skies and they didn't want the pollution.
Yeah.
And Europe then followed, and I was shocked because Germany has a tradition of manufacturing. It is in its DNA.
It is.
Right? America is a mercantile country. It's full of migrants. They're very good at what they do.
Good shopkeepers, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, they're good. They're very good salesmen also. Excellent. Yeah.
Yes.
And so but the Germans are really good on their manufacturing. I mean, it is the base of Germany, the guild system.
Yeah.
This is who they are.
Yes.
And they began to outsource to China. Now they realize it is a problem. And so they would really like to get their manufacturing back. They want to get their jobs. If they've got so many migrants, where are they going to put them to work? They wanted them, but you can't have everyone cleaning homes. And so they would really like to, they worry very much about that, and of course about the theft of technology. Whereas Brazil and South Africa, Brazil sends, or South Africa is dependent. And so these are the quite different reasons. And I think that this report has helped some of the Germans understand that China is on our border. It is literally there. Russia is not even on their border. There's a whole buffer country
That's right.
away from them.
And still they're worried.
And they're still at war.
Exactly.
And we had to explain to them, they are on our borders. We are not at war and we are not going to go to war. We will work this out and we will talk it through. That even if China provokes, we will still work it out because there's too much at stake to go to war that is unwinnable.
It's unwinnable.
Yeah.
It's going to be a disaster for both countries if certain lines are crossed, which can happen in the fog of war.
It could.
Yeah.
That's right.
What's the attitude towards UN reform and reforming of these multilateral organizations?
So UN reform is interesting. Most of our Brazil, India, South Africa, most of the developed world, we have status quos. We don't want to overthrow anything. The Germans want to replace the UN Security Council, whereas we want to just make sure that it opens the door for us. So I found it quite radical that Germany wanted to just replace the UN Security Council.
I see.
It should have a new one.
Okay.
And so we, for UN reform, we'd really like them to be more updated. So within the UN, some of the groupings have become quite, like within the World Bank system and the IMF, etc.
Yeah.
You know, you've now got the Bank of International Settlements, which is a little, these are more updated. The Financial Stability Board. These are G20 entities that have made it a little more participative, more inclusive. And, they put out the grey list, the FSB puts out the grey list, etc., etc. They're more updated with the way world finances are. And so we are okay with them getting reformed.
Yes.
And I think that the fear of the West that the BRICS is going to create its own alternate system, we are not going to do it. BRICS is not going to do it. BRICS wants to make sure that there is that international financial reform takes place. That is the goal of BRICS. The BRICS Plus just doesn't want to be at the mercy of the G7.
Yes.
And their very powerful and formidable coherence and their dominant funds. So having Saudi Arabia and UAE in the BRICS
Have the
Plus,
Saudis joined officially?
Yes, I think they've joined.
They've joined?
I think they're on the edge, but still,
Okay.
both are US allies.
They are both US allies, which is
Egypt is a
interesting.
US ally.
Egypt is
right?
very much so.
So you've got these US allies that are sitting inside an expanded BRICS. That should be sending a message to Washington that people really want some equity. You do not want to be at the Washington consensus works now for no one. Okay,
Yes.
Maybe it does. And maybe our developed countries have learned how to help ourselves, what to do and what not to do. So Egypt is now looking to be one of these emerging economies that's going to take itself out of its current condition by doing all the things that were prescribed, right, by the old institutions. And Argentina, which is so the BRICS, the G7 keeps equating BRICS with de-dollarization.
Okay.
And there is a move against. The reason I come to that, not everyone is de-dollarizing. Argentina, which didn't join BRICS Plus, is dollarizing because they need to get their economy in shape.
Yes.
And they've done a pretty good job. They've managed to cut inflation down, but it is dollarizing. The BRICS and BRICS Plus, it's not that they want to de-dollarize. No, they just want options. And all this has happened because of US sanctions.
That's right.
So you're a powerful... there is going to be no such thing as de-dollarization, partly because in the black markets and with the smugglers and with the mafia, the only thing that works is the dollar.
The US dollar, that's right.
The powerful US dollar. We just don't want the dollar to have its, what do they call it, exorbitant privilege.
Okay.
And so there should be other currencies that give it some balance. the Chinese are desperate for that, and so they try and tie in countries into yuan trade. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Countries without options are okay with doing it, but other countries don't necessarily want to do it. The yuan is also part of the IMF now currencies. It's part of the basket of currencies. But actually it has not made too much headway. So in terms of trade, maybe 20 years ago, China was 4%. Now it's 7% is yuan trade.
I see.
It's not that much because the dollar still has a lot of trust and it is very penetrated. So it's going to take a long time before another currency comes out. But the sorrow is that the euro, which would have been actually a good, strong non-dollar currency, where we kept some of our reserves. Some countries even had 30% reserves in euros, and then the Japanese yen.
Yes.
There's always that. No one is going to keep reserves in yuan, but people are just hedging their bets.
Yes.
And we can now trade with each other. But, the Indian bureaucrats remember very well when we had the ruble-rupee trade. They remember very well how hard it was to get out of it. So our bureaucrats in the foreign ministry have a horror of getting into these kind of trading arrangements. But if it has to be done, we're in a better position now to have, rupee exchanges with oil, etc., etc. And so, the de-dollarization isn't going to take place, but it sends a message.
What's the response to the expansion of BRICS? And have there been any concerns about the inclusion of Iran into BRICS Plus?
We didn't actually discuss it much in this report.
Okay.
The Europeans don't have the same problems with Iran as the US does.
Yeah, the main problem is the US has a problem with Iran.
Yes, the US has a problem with Iran. And in fact, when I had done a trip to Iran in 2016, the Europeans were everywhere.
Okay.
The Bavarian Chamber of Commerce, the German especially, everywhere. The Chambers of Commerce, the Bavarian, so and so. I mean, these are small states and districts that were coming in to talk to Iran about doing business with them. Iran needs a lot, right? It's been out of the world order for so long. But now China is able to fill in the gap that the US has not, and Russia now can too. And so we now have a world that is a sanctioned world and a non-sanctioned world.
Yes.
Right? The non-sanctioned world is using the dollar. The sanctioned world, or those affected by sanctions, are trying to find alternatives. So Iran, I think, is going to be the economy is, only a civilization can hold itself up the way Iran has since 1979.
Yes.
And they are doing okay. They've got their alternatives to everything.
They've worked it out.
They've worked it out. And they are also starting to invest. They are able to make drones. They're smart.
They're making good drones. Yes.
And so we did not discuss Iran very much, but I would say that, having Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iran in the BRICS Plus grouping may have unnerved people.
What about Ethiopia?
Oh, I don't know how Ethiopia got in there, but I think they wanted to be in the room. And so
it's good to have an African nation on board.
It was good to have an African nation.
Yeah.
All the African nations have a very strong sense of themselves. They don't think they're small and insignificant.
Ethiopia certainly doesn't think that.
It doesn't. Right. That's right. And so they have a very strong sense of themselves, and we should recognize that. You can't just club them all together into one continent, just like people think we're, one.
We're not a monolithic bloc. Neither is Africa. Africa is very diverse.
Yes.
Very diverse.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they are quite proud. So I think Ethiopia made a very good case for itself and got itself in, which is kind of nice.
It's fantastic. I like it.
Yeah.
So now there's this need for equity.
Yes.
There's this need for access to Western markets for the India, Brazil, South Africa. There is this demand for technology transfers and so on.
Yes.
So how do we make this happen? Is there any platform that we can use for the West and the non-West to sit together and work these things out? How do we implement these things?
So going back to the G20, that is really the one place where all these conversations can be had.
Okay.
The WTO, again, is one of these institutions that is so frustrating. It is refusing to reform. I don't know whether you've been there, but when you go to Geneva and you see this magnificent building on this Lake Geneva, it's so first world. how are they ever going to represent the interests of everybody equally?
Oh, yeah.
It's just not going to. It's hard to do that. And for developing countries that are emerging, you need a sense of confidence. You've got to have something to trade. You've got to have something good. India was lucky we had software, and so there's a great deal of respect for what we can do intellectually with our brain power. But it is the G20 has become that platform where they can talk trade. And now, because again, India sets the tone for a lot, because we've got new kind of trade agreements. Others can follow. Because, follow human capital, we can do some of that. And our endeavor, we will get access to the Western market. So we've got Australia, and now we have EFTA, the 3 non-EU countries, 4 non-EU countries, a trade agreement that was just 2 weeks ago was signed.
Okay.
So we are learning how to negotiate.
Actually, we are,
yes.
Yeah.
And before it used to be that there were 200 lawyers, American lawyers, sitting in front of you, and one undersecretary and one joint secretary holding the fort. So everything was very defensive. But now, for the first time, it's not offensive, but we are able to talk about something we have, something we can give, and something that we can take from them. Not always just, we know what technology we want to transfer. So, and also for the first time with India in particular, you've got the software. There is an understanding from the West that the software needs to be combined with the hardware. China was making a lot of the hardware. They don't have the software skills we have. And across the board, actually, India is a much better investment for everybody, because they recognize that really 30% of that investment is the front end of our software. That we can write all of this, because everything is now based on software. It's technologies everywhere, AI, it's all there. So it is now necessary for us to get the back end. I was talking to someone who headed Intel about 15, 20 years ago, and we tried 25 years ago, and Indian Americans were coming to India trying to create a fab plant.
Yes.
They couldn't do it. It wasn't clean enough. There wasn't enough water, etc. Intel talked about it. They wanted to make chips. And now, 25 years later, you've got Intel doing chip assembly, whatever it is. We are able to now do things that we weren't able to do before. So it is very important. The key for us is to not jump the gun, not get too cocky, because there is so much for us to learn, and we are 20 years behind China and 40 years behind everybody else, and we should never forget it. So humbly accept the learning until we have enough for ourselves.
Right. Keep your eyes on the ball.
Keep your eyes on the ball.
Keep your head down.
And similarly, Brazil and South Africa, and then you set the right example for people, just like Jaishankar did. So people say, yes, we can do this too. And then Indian companies also need to expand. So in South America, I think our big software expansion is in Uruguay, where TCS has a big center.
Okay.
Yes, a big software center where they service the US, the Spanish-speaking world, etc.
Okay.
But we have to be a little more. We have to think about supply chains now, because when the G7, the reason the G7 is so good is they think about everything. We also have to think about how are we going to bring Africa into the global supply chain. What are the things we have to plan very carefully ahead? If the supply chains are moving here, what should we do? And we also have to have greater connectivity amongst ourselves. With Brazil, for instance, we have no direct flights.
Okay.
We don't have indirect flights. It's a long way to Brazil, but we have to start getting that connectivity for ourselves, because these are important countries and they are our peers in the world that is to come.
It's interesting you mentioned connectivity. I mean, if you want to fly from here to Bishkek or Ashgabat, you can't do that. You have to go via Dubai or something. We need to change
That's
this.
Partly because of the sanctions.
The sanctions, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, you could have gone from Moscow.
How has Indian diplomacy changed in the past few years? It seems to have changed a lot.
It has changed considerably. We've just become more confident. And Mr. Jaishankar has changed the narrative. Actually, Mr. Modi has changed the narrative. Actually.
Yeah.
And he has, and Mr. Jaishankar, his minister, has been very quick to understand what is needed. And say in Angreji
Angreji.
to the Angrej.
Mm-hmm.
How to say it, he has been a master.
Yes.
And he said it very well. So the respect for India's articulation has gone up. Now I think the time has come for India. We are now going to be engaging in a different kind of diplomacy, and it is going to be economic diplomacy. So with the trade agreements coming up, it is going to be more important that we be seen, the politics is behind us, that we should be an economic partner for the world.
Right.
And that is when things really start to settle in. So I think we will start to see a change in the way we've been conducting our diplomacy. We will always be neutral. I mean, we knew after this war what Switzerland felt like. It's really nice to be neutral. And so
they haven't been quite so neutral of late.
they have not.
Exactly.
You're right, they have not. They have not. But they did something interesting. They took in the Ukrainians, they took about 25 or 30 of them, and they've sent most of them back because they gave them a 2-year time period to stay.
Okay.
So, but still, it is a non-EU country and they've signed a trade agreement with us. And so that is very exciting. We have to now explain to the world, and the world has to understand, India is going to be an economic story. And so our diplomacy will have to change accordingly. Our bureaucracy, just the bureaucracy within the foreign ministry has to change. We have to get more people, more MBAs. We have to get more people that understand business, that understand sales. Mr. Modi is a champion salesman.
Yes.
And Mr. Jaishankar has learned. He knows what to do and how to enhance the salesman. But now we actually have to sell ourselves.
Yes.
We need corporate India to be much more involved in our diplomacy and our foreign policy. And that I don't mean, appointing business heads as ambassadors. No, they need to be engaged in the strategy. They are extremely reluctant. They are still used to lobbying.
Even now.
But the truth is that Indian companies will not get respect unless they invest in, research. They support the academics. I mean, there are almost no companies that support think tanks. Okay, none. I mean, the Koba Foundation is just a shining example of what a company can do to spread research. Indian companies don't fund research. They don't fund chairs in universities. Some of them are now starting to build universities. It's not the same thing.
Yeah,
you build a university, it's fine. To fund a technical chair, get a top-notch German, electrical engineer and put him into IIT and say, you're here for 5 years, start a center, do what you have. And I am funding this. You've got all these companies, Siemens, they don't support anybody. Even the German companies here don't do it.
I see.
We've got the world's biggest pharma generics company. We don't fund chairs in our pharmaceutical colleges. This corporate India has to participate.
They have the funds, but they're not doing it.
They have the funds. It's a lot of work. It's much easier to lobby and get under the wire.
Okay.
So, but they will also not be respected by their peers unless they do this, because companies, especially in the West and the G7, are funding research. So, a German foundation is doing a survey that we would have loved to do with an Indian company. The Japanese support a lot of research in India. Really, does India want Japanese, German, and French research support when Indian companies can do much better because they understand the environment so much better? We should be doing that and not funding. I mean, it's okay to fund universities overseas and chairs, etc. Okay, it's part of their marketing.
Okay.
But they are doing it to the exclusion of what's going on here.
Oh, yeah.
So if Tata funds something at Harvard, 30 crores will change the face of Bombay University.
Oh, totally.
So, and all your employees come from Bombay University. So then, what investment are you making?
Yes.
Invest in your own future and your own youth so that your companies can stay on forever, because we know also companies have a life cycle.
Yes.
You want to survive, you've got to invest in the research, and we will be globally, we will be not just a market, but we will be a country that will be an equal.
Indeed. I'm sure there was no question about Israel, Gaza, the Middle East in the survey, but what would the attitudes be like when it comes to these four nations?
Yes. So the Israel-Gaza, actually, the survey was sent out in end September. It was fixed and sent out in end September. The
Just a
war
month
started,
before, yeah.
Just a few days before. In fact, the war started on the 7th of October. There wasn't much about this, but of course, it was part of the conversation. Because South Africa took
Yes.
Israel to the International Court of Justice. India doesn't have anything to say, and neither does Brazil.
Okay.
Brazil has condemned Hamas. It has also condemned Israel for doing what it does. Germany is in a very, very tough position.
How so?
Because, well, they feel even now, we went to
the old
Bundestag,
guilt.
yeah.
Okay.
They remember they did put to death 6 million Jews. They did create a problem that has resulted in a homeland for the Jews. They are pledged to that. That is part of who they are. That's today's Germany. But they also don't want to be party to, a full-scale destruction of
Gaza.
Of Gaza, of people. They really worry about people. They worry about the humanitarian because it conflicts directly with their values and human rights. And so they are in a real bind. They are extremely conflicted and they don't know what to do. So they would like to be supporting humanitarian aid, and they would really like to see this war stop.
Right.
Because it is an emotional and psychological and a existential crisis for them too.
Right. So this report, what happens next? How are the findings carried forward? What actions would you like to see?
So this report actually, this year was like a pilot.
A pilot project.
Yeah, and it turned out really well. Just because we all adjusted, we all understand each other well. We learned to understand each other. We were in communication almost every day for the last year, whether on WhatsApp or otherwise. This, I think, report is going to be continued.
Okay.
We will have different questions. It's going to be an annual affair.
Okay.
We'll have different questions, depending. It's going to be quite current, depending on what's going on in the world.
Okay.
Emerging middle powers, we're still India, Brazil, South Africa. There is talk about including one other middle power, and eventually that will be they're still under discussion about which country that should be, because there's now a long list of emerging powers. So there is talk about it. So maybe one other country or maybe two that we can slowly add on to it and start to get new kinds of questions, because that country will bring their own views and their own considerations. And so this is going to continue. This is the beginning of an annual survey of listening beyond the echo chamber.
How do you define middle power?
A middle power is, Canada thinks of itself as a middle power. Australia thinks of itself as a middle power.
Okay.
This is, and though they are middle powers, right? Germany is a middle power. France is a little more than a middle power.
A little more. It's got more than that.
More than middle power.
Yeah.
But those are the countries that are kind of advanced, even economically, and second tier. But this report is about emerging middle powers. We are not there yet.
But we want to get there.
It will be ideal for us to be middle powers. Jaishankar says we want to be a leading power. We have no desire to be a superpower because we cannot be. And we have too many people and too many needs to take care of. So being a middle power, it will be a big achievement, because that also means having a big middle class.
Yes.
Right? And having technology.
Yep.
And having some weight in the world in terms of trade and services. And so we are that emerging, we're aspiring to be where Australia and Canada do, but neither Australia nor Canada carry any weight internationally.
That's the point.
Right?
Yeah.
we will carry weight internationally. So in India in particular, we've not 1.4 billion people. Should we choose to move ourselves this way or this way, that's the way the world will turn.
Yeah.
Because the weight just matters. At the moment, we are in one place. At some point, we may want to move in another direction depending on our aspirations.
Yes.
Those are the steps that we will take towards becoming a middle power. And similarly with Brazil, if it gets over its resource. I mean, that's all they have is resources, right?
Yes.
They want more. They want to be able to more service, more balanced economy. Africa, South Africa, which has so much talent and so many attributes. That will also, it will take time before it also matures as a democracy and etc.
Yes.
And so we will be moving maybe in 10 years. We might become a middle power, at least by 2047. That's what Mr. Modi would like.
Yes.
By 2030, certainly we'll be able to know whether we're moving in that direction or not.
We'll get a good sense of that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So at the moment, we're emerging middle powers.
My last question before I give you the floor to talk about whatever else you would like. Climate change, is that a concern anywhere beyond Brazil?
Yes, it is a concern in India, very much so.
Okay.
It is a concern actually for everybody.
Okay, but Brazil is very specific about that.
Brazil is very specific because of the Amazon.
Amazon forest, rainforest.
And also South America has been, unfortunately, the recipient of a lot of US agriculture companies.
Oh yes, animal agriculture, soybeans, whatnot.
And also the spraying of the fertilizers, just the spraying of chemicals, which has really demolished so much of their fertile lands, etc., and their people. And so climate change is very, very important to them. For us also, it is very important. But really, all the three middle powers see it as an imposition of, it's another one of these policies that the West puts out, saying that, forget about this war and that war and forget China. Now the new danger is climate change and you better get used to it. So you have to do this, this and this, and we're telling you this is how you get there. Unfortunately, we know and Brazil is in fact going to be it's going to head the COP30 next year.
Okay.
30 COPs.
30 COPs.
30 conference parties.
And then what's the result? What's the outcome?
No result.
Exactly.
No result. Climate change is, a lot of people say it's a bogey. The environment has always been a concern. And of course, the biggest polluter has been the West.
Yes.
Now they've outsourced that pollution to China.
Yes.
And maybe they'll outsource it back, resource it back to themselves. But it is just being more careful about your environment. Climate change has become a thing where now a lot of resources are being put in it. It's become a way to beat countries with.
Oh yes, a stick to beat them with.
Yeah. And so without a real... and the whole West, their whole way of how they see themselves, clean blue skies, green energy. We know now with the Russia-Ukraine war that Germany is going to get their coal fields going again.
They're already fired up.
Right?
Yes.
Nuclear has been called now, green. It's carbon. It's endless, the kind of hypocrisy that is going on.
Absolutely.
You can't do it. You need the oil. And if you're going to stop the clean gas from Russia, then how can you actually convert yourself into... Actually, Germany was doing fine until the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yes, it was
doing
doing
with
fine.
the China, it was because it had the cheap energy that allowed its industry to grow.
That was the thing that grew the economy.
Right.
Yeah.
And for people to stay warm. So Angela Merkel knew what to do. And so we have to see how climate change becomes something more than just a slogan or a stick. And certainly the environment changes because human beings do things that change the way nature works. But the champions of that manipulating nature is the West, it's not us. And China has done a lot of this, especially with their dams, etc. China, unfortunately, is copying the West, right? They don't. We have our own model.
Yes.
Brazil will have its own model. In time, the Africans will have their own model also.
It's interesting you said that China is copying the West. I think that
China is a replica of the West.
They idolize the US, don't they?
That's right.
Yeah.
They want to be the United States.
That's right.
They love the US. They want to be the US. And the US they love the adoration. China adores these countries because they see them as being, very advanced, etc. And also we must not forget that China has not, because of the Cultural Revolution, they never really had a middle management as such, because they, all their talent was gone. They didn't have teachers to teach in the universities, not enough. They had a lot of peasants and then the elite in the Communist Party. And so they imported a lot of people from the West. And so the West has been embedded in China. The British lawyers have written their laws, right? The Brits and the Americans, etc., have sent their teachers to teach in their schools and universities, set up their university departments. As China made money, they in turn funded US education institutions. They're very enmeshed with each other, and joyfully so.
Joyfully so.
But China's main goal is the United States. They cannot see beyond the US. Everything else, even we, are makhis. They're not important.
Okay.
Europe follows the US, and so China talks to them, but really they only see the US as somebody worth talking to, and now increasingly as their equal, though I don't know how long that will last.
What's the distribution of this report? Where does it go out to? And who all are the intended recipients?
So the recipients of this report is government, policy makers around the world, especially in these 4 countries.
Okay.
People like you, the media, and also people with influence. When you want this report explained, it's a way for people to communicate, to understand how the world is working and how people are changing. Academics, the security agencies, and people in the world. Actually, it's open for everybody. And this is a very telling title, Listening Beyond the Echo Chamber.
Indeed, yes.
I don't know anybody that has written a paper like this that is mainstream to say that we have to listen beyond the echo chamber, that we are indeed in an echo chamber.
Indeed. So for the viewers, the link to this paper will be in the description of the video.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll keep it down there.
Yes, thank you.
Any concluding thoughts?
Concluding thoughts really is that I would say I'm really happy. I wish that we could do more such surveys in India, that we could look at ourselves and other countries. I would love to do something like this with South Asia, because we are actually now, as a subcontinent, we are coming together. Sri Lanka, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Maldives, Afghanistan could.
There's just one problem in the subcontinent, just
That's
one.
Right. Myanmar. It still is a problem, but we are actually playing a role, we participating in Myanmar. But we would love to see a report, a good survey. How do the other countries view India? How did they view them 10 years ago? How do they view them now?
That's really interesting. Yeah?
Yes. And I wish we could get the funding to do it. We do it. But get the think tanks in different countries to sit together and send it out to their policy makers. How do you think? What does the elite think? And what do ordinary people also think?
Indeed.
So we'd love to do that. So this is going to go, it's open for everybody. And it's really easy to read because it has 2-page op-eds from different people.
Yes.
And then you've got all these great charts and graphics,
yes,
which are easy to read and tells you right away. Well, the Brazil, how do you describe the dominance of the US dollar? Brazil does not like it. India is 50-50.
Yeah.
Germany is favorable, and South Africa, no, they don't like it either. So it's a good at a glance. So I would say this is very sophisticated, better than what McKinsey can do. And really, we should not have, these should be done by think tanks and policymakers and not by consultants and companies, but the company should sponsor this because it's important for them and their markets,
Indeed.
the future markets.
So we can look forward to more versions of this every year.
Yes, every year.
All right.
every year.
Awesome. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
explaining what this is about. Lovely talking to you.
Nice talking to you too.
All
And we
right.
appreciate your interest.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So that was the conversation. Hope you liked it. If you enjoyed this, please share this on WhatsApp and other media. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.